Gravity Falls, a show of humor, mystery, and casual viewing. Unless you're me. My name is Christian. You're probably wondering why I'm dressed as Dipper Pines and about to rewatch the entire series. Rest assured, there's a perfectly logical explanation.
All right, now we move on to Double Dipper. This is definitely another one of my favorite episodes, and definitely a huge episode as far as like character introductions. And the basic premise of this episode is that Stan wants to earn more money for the Mystery Shack, so he decides to throw a big party and then charge an entrance fee and also an exit fee as well. And of course, Dipper and Mabel being opposites, Mabel loves parties and can't wait to have more people come to the Mystery Shack and meet new people. But then Dipper is like feeling obviously very insecure about parties and kind of has this whole big list of things that he wants to do in order to impress Wendy, and this whole theme of like kind of getting into your own way. And one of the conflicts is that Stan wants Dipper to man the ticket booth, but then Wendy kind of goes inside to the party. But then obviously Dipper wants to spend time with Wendy, but then he also has to man the booth. So he's like, I wish I can be at two places at once. So then in the beginning of the episode, the twins actually discover a clone copy machine, and then when Dipper accidentally puts his hand on the copy machine, it actually copies his arm. So then you see this disembodied arm crawling across the floor, and then Dipper gets scared and like throws his soda on it. It kind of bubbles and dissolves and everything. So then obviously Dipper uses this to his advantage. He clones himself, and then he's about to call it Dipper number 2, but then number 2 obviously doesn't like that because it's a reference to what. So then he calls him Tyrone, which is like a name that Dipper's always wanted to have, like a cool name. And then as the episode goes on, things become more and more complicated. He creates more and more clones in order to kind of cover all these different like scenarios where things can go wrong. We have Dipper number 3 and 4, and then so on and so on. And then we also have Paper Jam Dipper, who's kind of like the crumbled up version of Dipper, kind of always says like and stuff like that. One of the scenarios is that they go downstairs and they see that Wendy is talking with Robbie, who just showed up to the party. So they need to find out a way to distract Robbie so that Dipper number 1 can talk to Wendy. And then Dipper number 3 and 4 go outside and steal Robbie's bike. And then Robbie leaves the party so that Dipper can talk to Wendy again. And a couple Easter eggs that we find out is that we get confirmation that Wendy Corduroy is actually the daughter of Manly Dan, because Wendy shows Dipper a family photo of Wendy with Manly Dan and her other brothers who were introduced in Legend of the Gobblewonker. And then on the flip side, Dipper tells his embarrassing story about where he got his nickname, and then he kind of lifts his hat, and then we see on his forehead that he has a birthmark in the shape of the Big Dipper, which pretty much just looks like acne, which Alex Hirsch said that was inspired by real life, where he had like a classmate back in like elementary school who had like a bunch of like acne on his forehead that looked like constellations. So that's where we get his name Dipper from, and we don't get to know his real name unless you read journal number 3, so definitely highly recommend that, or you can just look at the wiki, that works too. So that's one storyline, and then we get to the party storyline with Mabel, where we get introduced to a bunch of new characters. We get introduced to the character of Grenda Greninator, whose last name isn't mentioned in the series, but according to the wiki, her last name is Greninator, so I think that's interesting. And Kenny Chu, and they definitely become main characters as the rest of the story goes on and become Mabel's best friends. They have a bunch of like fun times together. And then we get introduced to the character of Pacifica Northwest, who's the daughter of the richest family in town, the Northwest, who will get introduced later. And the whole storyline that Mabel is going through is that she's competing for the role of the party queen and has to do all these different like events and everything, like karaoke and stuff like that. And Pacifica, being Pacifica, obviously wants to be the party queen, have the party crown and everything, and kind of challenges Mabel to all these different events. So that kind of sets up their rivalry for the rest of the series, and then kind of sets up Candy and Grenda kind of being Mabel's main supporters. So I think that's really fun. But yeah, everything kind of gets resolved with, at least as far as Dipper's storyline, where all the clones kind of turn on Dipper and they kind of throw him into the closet and they kind of try to go for Wendy themselves. But then Dipper figures out that he has to kind of get rid of the clone somehow. So then they have this kind of big clone fight, and then they realize that they're just gonna be fighting forever and that nothing's gonna come from it. So then Dipper actually sets off the sprinklers, and that melts all the clones. And then Dipper and Tyrone end up going back downstairs to the party, and they see that Robbie's back and then he's talking with Wendy again. So then Dipper realizes that all this over planning is kind of ruined everything, and that Robbie just ended up talking with Wendy anyway. And then on the flip side, it ends with Pacifica winning the party crown and just being her selfish self, and Mabel kind of apologizing to Kenny and Grenda for not winning the crown. around, but Ken and Grenna not really caring about that and mostly caring about just being with each other and being friends and everything. And then Dipper 1 and 2 kind of have like a heart to heart. And then Tyrone pretty much tells Dipper that, he's getting in his own way and that, he should just get rid of the list and just be himself. So then, they kind of drink to that with their pick cola, and then Tyrone kind of like melts and everything. They're on the roof. The second time that Dipper has seen like a melted character on top of the roof, kind of goes back into the party and then kind of becomes himself. We don't get to see like what Dipper does when he actually enters the party, but we assume like, he dances with the friends and then, decides to kind of just be himself. And so I think like overall, it's like a really good episode, really fun episode. Anything with a party is like really, really fun. And, parties will definitely become a theme like as the series goes on for sure. The kind of like social anxieties that kind of come with it. We also got a cryptogram at the end, which translates to Paper Jam Dipper says, which is actually pretty funny. But yeah, overall, great fun episode. A lot of Easter eggs, a lot of characters that get introduced, and overall just a fun episode for sure.